I don't read many biographies, but a few months ago I picked this one up because as Borders was going out of business all around the United States, they started to progressively lower and lower and lower their prices. And when things got to be at around 80 or 90% off, I just swooped in and bought everything that even looked remotely interesting. And this was one of those books. This $30 is the cover price, and I think I got it for either $3 or $6. And I don't read a lot of biographies, but this guy has always really fascinated me. And again, it's the scope and size of his influence that's really one of the most important things. The man in question here is Claude Levi-Strauss, who is a French anthropologist. And the book I'm talking about is Claude Levi-Strauss, The Poet in the Laboratory by Patrick Wilcken. Claude Levi-Strauss is probably the most influential anthropologist of the 20th century. Born in France, didn't do much field work at all, considering that he was an anthropologist, but what little he did was done in South America, specifically Brazil. I'll go on to talk about this in the body of my review, but he just had an enormous influence on the next generation of anthropologists after him. And structuralism was popular in anthropology for quite a while after he wrote his most famous books. And I do tend to shy away from biographies, and it's because a lot of biographers either tend to be hagiographers or attack dog hacks, and you don't really get a lot of in between. But Patrick Wilken's biography of Levi-Strauss avoids both of these and cuts a nice middle road between the two. And the result is a really nice book that takes Levi-Strauss seriously and criticizes him where Wilcken thinks he needs criticism, and praises him where he thinks he needs praise, and gives him the due consideration that he deserves, and it's very fair in that respect, and it's never obsequious towards Levi-Strauss at all. Aside from presenting the arc of Levi-Strauss's life, he does the same thing for the place of academic anthropology in both the United States and in Europe. In fact, Levi-Strauss was doing his field work in Brazil among the Bororo, the Nambiquara, and the Kapi-Kawahib peoples. While that was happening, anthropology departments in the United States were just in their infancies. The giants in the field at the time were people like Branislaw Malinowski, Marcel Mauss, and Franz Boas, all of whose work seems oddly anachronistic now in the light of Levi-Strauss's and his students' structuralist influence, and I'll explain what structuralism is in a bit below. Levi-Strauss's training was not in anthropology at all, actually, until he went to go do his field work. He was a law and philosophy student, but during his youth he was constantly engaged with art. His father was a portrait artist, and he also loved music and politics. And while he was mostly interested in mythography and kinship studies in his anthropological career, he occasionally wrote on the subjects of art and music, which maintained his interest all throughout his life. He was an avowed leftist politically during the interwar years, and he later turned inward and became apolitical later. In his old age, and he did live to be 100 years old, he would become disgruntled at the growing multicultural nature of France, and especially of France's acceptance of Islam and Muslims. In 1955, Levi-Strauss's best-known book, Triste Tropique, appeared, which is a memoir which recounted his time spent among the Aboriginal peoples of Brazil. and it's usually considered his only non-academic book. The other books are very, very dense, very difficult, but this one is sort of reads like a travelogue and a memoir hybrid. In it, he began to show the first signs of pessimism about the culture of native peoples and its possibility for the preservation of their traditions, and how Brazilian civilization was destroying them. Because of Levi-Strauss's peculiar path, he chose to interrupt his formal work by accepting an invitation to do field work in Brazil. He had difficulty re-entering the academic world when he returned to France at the end of the 1940s. The eruption of World War II, during which he fled to New York City, didn't help getting back on track either. But while in the U.S., he found work at the New School for Social Research, where he would first gain contact with one of his big influences, who was the Russian-born linguist Roman Jacobson, who is also known for his influence on structuralism. It was only after Levi-Strauss borrowed from Jacobson's linguistic structuralism that he himself became known as the father of linguistic anthropology. Structuralist anthropology. Structuralism, for those who are unfamiliar with the word, is a theoretical approach, a theoretical paradigm that suggests that culture or language or myth or whatever else can only be fully understood as an interrelationship between smaller, simpler parts. And this would be absolutely fundamental to Levi-Strauss's later analysis of mythology and kinship systems. Wilcken seems to have a particular interest in showing how Levi-Strauss's interest in structuralism as a formal method developed in tandem with his interests in Freud, Jacobson, art, and literature. Levi-Strauss's work, while sometimes known for its cold formalism, was just as often attacked for its lyricism and its over-subjectivity, its sort of aestheticized approach, especially in his mythography. And I found this duality really appropriate, sort of going through the body of his work. For a thinker who himself was always splitting things into twos and fours and graphs and taking things apart, that's very illustrative of his structuralism. And he makes these sort of in-dimensional matrices to suss out the true complexities hidden in the permutations that he spins out of his mythemes. And he's just a very analytical guy, but he also has a lot of fun with it, and I can certainly see why he's criticized for both from both sides in that respect. Wilcken discusses Levi-Strauss's most important work in a really fair, even-handed way, and he even devotes a whole chapter to Tristes Tropiques, and quite a bit of time considering his gigantic 4-volume, 2,000-page mythologique quartet, which Levi-Strauss wrote a bit later in his life, that often considered to be the masterpieces of his middle career. With the exception of Tristes Tropiques, Levi-Strauss's work has the reputation of being fantastically difficult, replete with charts and graphs of endogamous and exogenous kinship relations that probably only the fully anthropologically initiated can fully understand. I don't consider myself to be of that group. And while Wilcken never really scratches the surface of Levi-Strauss's ideas with that kind of depth, this, while a wonderful biography, is no means an intellectual biography. It's not a real presentation of the heart of what Levi-Strauss has to say. The way he talks about his development in his career goads the reader, or at least goaded me, to want to learn even more about him. And to that end, I've dusted off a few related books in my library, including another book I'm going to review just now called Myth and Meaning, which was written by Levi-Strauss himself, an imprint from Cambridge University by a man named Christopher Johnson, which is called Levi-Strauss: The Formative Years, and I would even suggest picking up Triste Tropique itself. Claude Levi-Strauss, The Poet in the Laboratory by Patrick Wilcken.